Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Fit Chicks Chat. My name is Laura Jackson, and on today's episode, we have a very special guest, Dr. Cheryl Allen. Hi, Cheryl.
Hey, Laura.
Who I'm so excited to have her here, not only so everyone on the podcast can meet her, but also because we're going to be talking about one of the hottest topics right now when it comes to health and coaching, which is menopause.
Mm.
So I would love just to start off with a quick introduction, if you just want to introduce yourself and let everyone know who you are, because we got a lot to cover today.
We do. Well, thank you, Laura, and thanks for having me on to talk about this. I love this topic, and as we chat more about it, I think everyone else will see as well just how important it is and how we need to have more of these conversations. And but yes, my background. My background is in nutrition, so I went through to be a dietitian. And from there, loved it so much that I wanted to go back and learn more about how to integrate nutrition in with respect to medical care. And so I now work as a naturopathic doctor. And early on in my practice as a naturopath, I was seeing a lot of women and realizing how much these little things that we will talk about today, hormones, play such a pivotal role in women's health. And so that led me to carry on and do further training through the North American Menopause Society. And now I hold the menopause practitioner credential as well, and use that a lot in the work that I do with women's health.
Well, and this is something because I have talked about this previously on the podcast, but if you're new to listening to it, we recently, with Dr. Cheryl, have created a new certification called the Holistic Perimenopause and Menopause Coach Certification. It's a certificate program to really add in this specific menopause-focused health coaching into whether you're a fitness professional, nutritionist, yoga instructor, if you just want to learn for yourself, because it is honestly the number one question we get in Fit Chicks Academy is always around hormones. And the second is around, I don't know what's going on in my body because I'm over the age of 40, things are shifting. My doctor just tells me, it's just normal, just go with it, or basically usually do nothing, or prescribing some different medication. Women feel completely out of control in their own health, or they've already crossed that menopausal threshold and they just kind of think, okay, well, this is how I'm supposed to be for the rest of my life, which is really frustrating. So when we decided that we were going to create this certification after all of these questions, just to really help women start to lead their own nutrition, Dr. Cheryl already instructs in the Holistic Nutrition Weight Loss Coach certification. So we're like, oh my gosh, I know how passionate she is. We are super passionate. So we joined forces and we just launched our first group in November of 2023, which was absolutely incredible. And we have our next group starting. But I just really feel like, a lot of people, this conversation is becoming a lot more mainstream lately, right? Like around what are the differences for women, not just for women than men, but for women when they hit a certain point in their life. Because most doctors, I believe it, what's the stat, Cheryl? It's like doctors receive about like 8 hours of nutrition education in their entire careers. Now, I don't even know, unless you specialize in women's health and hormones, how much that is around menopause, but I did hear on a podcast that it's about the same, that they really only receive about 8 hours of, of training and residency around the menopause transition.
Right. And to add to that too, it's like when we come in and the way our healthcare system is structured, it's like come in for your 10-minute appointment. There's no way in that 10-minute time frame you're going to be able to look at all the different facets that are affected by the change in hormones. Because when, as you said, Laura, when our hormones shift and change, it doesn't just affect one little thing. It creates this domino cascade in our body that will show up in a wide variety of different symptoms. So when you come and you say, hey, I'm noticing this, there isn't the space to have these really needed conversations around how, hey, when this changes, it's causing these other symptoms to show up because of this different cascade that's showing up.
And I just find this stuff so fascinating. I mean, I know even when I first started out on my own health journey, obviously I was not perimenopausal or menopausal. I am now. So of course this for me is super interesting. But when I was first starting out, just even learning about my own body and the things I did not know. Like the things we are never taught in school, we are not talked about in our families or in our doctors. And a lot of women are left feeling completely lost. And I know this is really hard for coaches too, because they don't know how to then also coach their clients to help to figure this out because they don't know either.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm really excited to have this conversation today and trying to start to put some of these pieces together for people who are listening who, might be going through perimenopause or menopause or have clients who are. This is going to be a two-part conversation too. So make sure to check out next week as well, where we're going to finish it off. But I was hoping you could start off by talking about why is menopause so important for women to understand
Mm.
for themselves, but also for their clients?
Yeah. And I think, like you said, it's one of those things where we don't talk about it a lot, and then all of a sudden we're there and things are happening and it's weird and crazy and strange, and we don't have a sense of understanding what's going on. Even the idea or the term of perimenopause up until
Yeah,
recently, like, have you heard of
and I've been in the health coaching industry for going on like 20 years. And I only heard about this word probably in the last like 3 to 4 years. And previous to that, I didn't even know what happened in my cycle pretty much.
Yes.
So it's like there was never even talked about what happens every single month other than I just have a period. And then one day I just don't have a period. Like that was kind of my understanding of the whole what's happening with my hormones.
Right. And oftentimes we will look at hormone stuff in and around the time of fertility, if a
Hmm.
woman's trying to have kids. And then afterwards, I will sometimes joke, it's almost like we enter into this like hormone no man's zone between the time we have kids and then menopause, where like it's all as if nothing was happening. And yet the more that we understand around this idea of actually, yeah, there is this thing called perimenopause, and that it's also not attached to a certain age. That's another myth
Mm.
that comes up. We often think, or I often will have clients come in and say, well, but I'm too young for that, right? There isn't an age associated with that. If symptoms are showing up, we need to look and understand that further. And to have an understanding of what actually may happen if my hormone levels change, so that you can have an understanding of the impact that these hormones have, both estrogen. And when we say hormones, we're talking mainly about the shift and change in estrogen and progesterone, which are our main female hormones. But when those hormones change, it doesn't just affect those two, it can affect a whole slew of other hormones as well. So now we have to include in that discussion, how does this change impact things like my thyroid, my adrenal system, cortisol, insulin response? All of these things are impacted by the change of perimenopause.
And just to put that into a little bit of perspective, when we're talking about, when you're saying like cortisol, does anyone, relate to not be able to suddenly handle as much stress anymore or feeling overwhelmed all the time? Or insulin and thyroid, like suddenly you are gaining weight and you don't know why. Like these are all the symptoms of menopause, perimenopause that women are saying they're not understanding there is that hormonal connection, which then also comes from their female sex hormones. Okay,
Mhm.
let's back this up a little bit. I know you just mentioned about perimenopause, there's no specific age, but let's just get a little definition. So, what is perimenopause and what is the average age that it kind of starts around to give people kind of a ballpark?
Yes.
And how long does it usually last for?
Yeah, great question. So, by definition, perimenopause has kind of a vague definition, meaning that it's in and around the time of menopause. And I think that's probably also why it's been a bit tricky to kind of hammer out a clear understanding of what this time frame means, because it can vary woman to woman in terms of when it can happen, how long it is. Generally speaking, symptoms of perimenopause will show up somewhere in your 40s. That being said, it can happen earlier. And the average time frame that it can last for is anywhere from a couple of years to 10 or more years. So you can see where when we're looking at 10 years, like 10 years is a long, it's a long time.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, the symptoms that show up in and around perimenopause can be more significant and impact our quality of life even more than symptoms that show up into menopause and beyond. So when you're saying the symptoms that you were mentioning, like the common symptoms that will show up will be around mood changes, night sweats, inability to
Night
sleep,
sweats.
inability to deal with stress, feeling like you're just jumping into different emotions without that bandwidth to kind of assess how you're, how you're wanting to engage in a certain moment or period of time. And physical symptoms too. Period can be all over the map, anywhere from having period every 2 weeks to missing a cycle to just having almost no period or bleeding to having really super heavy, crazy period. Like all of it's like this unknown zone roller coaster ride of of hormones.
Well,
And so,
even as you were saying, sorry to interrupt, but even as you were saying, it's the definition is in or around the time of menopause. It's like, how are we supposed to even, make sense of what's going on if the definition is that vague?
yeah.
And I mean, I just was recently at a party too with a Christmas party with two of my girlfriends who are the same age and who are going through two totally different experiences than I am. So there's three of us, basically like a little, test group. So I'm of course asking them about what's going on, with their perimenopause and if they are in it. And they both are. And one of them said to me, and she gained quite a bit of weight unexpectedly, like very fast. Like she gained 10 pounds really, really fast, not really changing much of her diet or exercise. She already was active, eating, quite nutritionally dense. She said also suddenly out of nowhere, her breasts were like so sore as if she was pregnant. Then she was like really, her skin suddenly got really oily and her hair was always oily, but then it would go to dryness. So this back and forth. While my other friend, she was experiencing pretty much no symptoms, except for she just basically suddenly had no interest in sex anymore. And then there's me, who I'm just suddenly going through these bouts of night sweats. So they kind of stop and then they come back. And it's like, okay, well, what do I kind of focus on if my A, everyone's symptoms are different, but B, the symptoms change so much, maybe even month to month.
And that's exactly, and what you described, like between the three of you, like that covers kind of the breadth of different types of symptoms that will commonly show up. And like you said, it's one thing to have these symptoms show up. It's another thing for them to show up in this kind of infrequent pattern. And so it leaves like the kind of common feeling too that it can leave women with, and you alluded to this at the beginning, is feeling like, I don't even know this body anymore. I thought we kind of had a thing going and now I don't. It's showing, it makes it really challenging to navigate life. And I think that comes down to, or distills down that piece why it's so, so important, is it impacts how every facet of how we're showing up in our lives.
Mhm. And then, so, okay, so that's perimenopause. So starting after 40. Now, this is where I find things get not confusing for people, but we've only ever really heard about menopause. And there I'll let you explain it, but let's start off with what is menopause. So we understand the difference between perimenopause and menopause.
Yeah. And you're right, because when we're talking about it just in our cultural, and social way, like menopause is almost as if it's a season, but medically it has a slightly different definition. So menopause by definition is when our egg reserve is complete. So no more eggs. That part of our reproductive part of our life is done. And so that point, and of course there's no big lights that start flashing at the time of like, this is the last egg, like we're done now. There isn't that.
You're going into menopause.
So to actually know that we are complete in terms of our ovarian or our egg reserve is that we only know it in retrospect or in after the fact. So after we have gone 12 months without a cycle, you can look back and say, like, at that point, that's when a woman entered into menopause.
So this is the thing that I always think is so interesting, which is why I'm so excited we created this course and we're having these conversations, is that I believe that definitions matter, which is why I think, even we were saying about the perimenopause being so loose, because we all want something kind of concrete. And even this, like, it's so muddled as to, okay, well, I only know that I've entered menopause 12 months after it's happened. And then we've kind of been taught that there's this, it is like you said, like flipping the switch of like, okay, well now you're in menopause and you're going to have to deal with all of these symptoms of that ongoing. What would be the symptoms more of, so you were saying the perimenopause, what would be the symptoms of postmenopause? So okay, hey, I've hit that kind of 12-month mark. There's no more eggs. What
Yeah.
would be some of the symptoms that would be experienced there?
Right. So so once we're into that, and then again, by definition, technically once we've clocked that 12 months, we're into now post-menopause, because now we're beyond the time where where
Yeah, so let's add another definition in there
yeah,
too. There's actually
exactly.
postmenopause.
Which is really that time, like for the rest of our lives that we are in after our cycles stop, is that post-menopause time. If we really want to get into the nitty-gritty details of it, there is kind of early and late post-menopause that have slightly different hormone mixes involved in them. But for what we're talking about right now, it's important to kind of keep in mind that that's that second half, or that second part of the of our lifespan is spent in that time frame. And just to add in some context too, for most women, we will spend about 40% of our life in postmenopause. So it is a very relevant discussion, because we are spending almost half of our lives in postmenopause. But anyway, sorry, to get back to your question around symptoms. Symptoms in postmenopause often will include things like, again, we will see changes in estrogen and progesterone again happen at that time frame, which will create symptoms like hot flashes now in the daytime. So often we will see nighttime hot sweats in perimenopause, and then in postmenopause, it's like daytime hot flashes. Changes in moods, change in libido and sex drive is very common. Vaginal dryness, changes in urinary urgency, like or even symptoms around urinary tract infections, feeling like the need to urinate even just when laughing, or things like that. Those are really common symptoms that we will see show up in postmenopause. Oh, and
Well,
brain
and
fog.
I'd like to add a few more that obviously a lot of my coaches are see a lot with their clients, which is like the weight gain around the middle, the belly fat, which is referred to by a lot of clients. That's what they usually say. I'm gaining suddenly a ton of weight around my midsection. And also brain fog. Brain fog is a big one too. And this is where, I want to really make sure everyone understands when we're talking about symptoms. Symptoms are not like a destination that you are going to that you just have to deal with. I always think of symptoms, these are your body talking to you that something is going on. It's your body's language, right? Your body can't use words, so it shows up in these symptoms. So then that becomes the question of what is causing those symptoms. So this is why we developed this certification too, is to start to understand how do we start to learn how these hormones all work together, and how do we get them into balance so we can reduce these symptoms or alleviate them completely. And not only that, I think one of the biggest conversations that you and I've had offline that I think most people don't understand is how much this shift in hormones through the perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause journey really affects women's health, and not just the quality of their life, but their actual health, their longevity, the prevention of diseases, all of those things.
Yeah. Because often too, we will, like, best case in our societal's conversation around menopause is, jokes about hot flashes and these types of things,
Mhm.
where it you're bringing up a really good point around the fact that when our hormones change, it changes our disease risk for certain things. So we now know that when estrogen and progesterone levels drop, it increases a woman's risk of heart related diseases,
Mhm.
osteoporosis, so bone health, as well as even and more recent research into looking at how change in hormones affect risk of dementia and cognitive function in the long term. Like, even when we're looking at things like blood sugar regulation and these type, like all of these things are related to and impacted by the change in female hormones. So as much as, yes, symptoms are important, like you said, to look into, and then really can impact someone's quality of life, and we need to also include in the discussion that when we enter into menopause, it changes our risk for these different long-term disease profiles.
Well, and that's where, from a coaching perspective, and whenever I say coaching too, it's whether you're coaching yourself or you're coaching other people. This stage of life is so important to understand for yourself or your clients. And again, not just because suddenly you're gaining weight or you want to shift your physique or your workout programs are no longer working. I have so many coaches who come to me and say, I've had a client for 10 years and what we're doing suddenly is having the opposite effect. I don't know why. It's hormonal, right? Because they're not working out with the hormones, they're working out against it. But I just think from a coaching perspective, it's so important because as coaches, and again, whether you're coaching yourself or coaching others, we are the first step in preventative health, right? If we could change the way that we eat, the way we think, the habits, and the way that we act on a day-to-day basis, we can completely change the trajectory of our lives, the experience we have in menopause, and all of those things. So I just think it's so important that we understand that this is something that needs to be talked about. It needs to be focused on in your life, in your client's life, not just again to get them to their goals, but because it literally can change your life and your health. So I feel like menopause, and I'm excited because I think it's a lot more of a mainstream conversation. Whereas, as you said before, it was like, oh, you're going through menopause. Anytime we talked about hormones, it was like hot flashes. Those are the first words that pop into mind. I actually did that. I was playing a game over the holidays. And when it's like taboo and there's a
Oh yeah.
word and there's 5 words you can't say. So it's one of those similar words. And it had the word menopause. And I was laughing. I should take a picture for you because it was like the first words were moody, hot flashes, and like hormones and something else. So anytime we talk about women's hormones, we always think it's around, being bitchy or moody or again, hot flat, like these kind of things. But it's such an important conversation for health. And we can balance these and really help to support them through so many things that as coaches we have access to. Um, so I'm really excited that we're talking about this on the podcast. And I'm even more excited about the program that we've created. So I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit, which ties into a tool that we created in the, I'm going to call it HPMC because it's very long to say holistic perimenopause and menopause coach in HPMC, is this concept of the menopause transition archetypes.
Mm.
So this is the thing that I think is very, not just different about the course we created, but what's really important for everyone to understand is that every single person's perimenopausal and menopausal and postmenopausal journey is going to be completely different based on different factors. But then it's how do we start to figure out, well, what's mine going to be like, or what's my client's going to be like? So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about this cool assessment tool and why we created it.
Yes. And you're so right, Laura. And if you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you already share the belief of looking at health from an individual perspective,
Mm-hmm.
realizing that although there's patterns and similarities, as we all are humans, but there's also unique factors that show up. And menopause is no different. You can talk to or interview 5-10 women that are in perimenopause or into postmenopause, and there will be similarities you'll see, and there's also differences, which again can be challenging as a coach or someone working with clients, that it's like, well, how do I know how to apply certain recommendations? Do I do that for all women in this age or in this hormonal stage? But not everyone's going to present with the same symptoms. Just like Laura, you and your 3 friends, it's like
Yeah.
there's overlap and there's very specific differences that are not going to be the same across the board. And therefore, as well, when we're looking at our recommendations and how we're going to be suggesting different movement or nutrition supportive strategies, we want to make them in as much alignment with the person we're working with as possible. And so when we were talking this through, we realized there really isn't a good tool available right now that brings into the discussion all of these other systems, so body systems that are involved in regulating our hormones, because it's going to make a big difference on, let's say, for one woman whose, let's say, liver is functioning a bit more sluggishly, they're going to have a different constellation of symptoms than someone whose liver isn't,
Mhm.
as well as looking at other hormones as well, and how, where those levels are and how they can impact that domino effect of changes in estrogen and progesterone. So through all of this, we created this concept of menopause archetypes, which really highlights the unique experiences that we will all go through in terms of our menopause, perimenopause journey.
Well, and also what I love about this tool too is it's a really great coaching tool, again, for yourself, but for your clients too, because you get access to it within the program where it gives you that place to know we've got our baseline recommendations and then where do I go from here? Because as Cheryl was saying, like everyone's experience is so different. And I know even, from coaching clients, it's like you could have two people who are 45 years old on paper, who are 150 pounds, who both have the same goal, but you can't give them the same program. One will respond amazing and one won't at all because there are these other things involved. And it's what we were talking about at the beginning, so many people just think that perimenopause and menopause is around estrogen and progesterone. And yes, those are the two main hormones, but there's so many other hormones that affect them. And how do we know how those hormones are reacting or what they're doing in the body? So this assessment tool is a way to kind of start to understand that. So again, you cannot just make these recommendations that are focused on menopause in general, but then how do we start to add in those nuances that are for each of your individual clients? And I absolutely love it. I found it was so cool to do this, and I made my friends at the party do it. So now I know that they're archetypes, so I know what I'm going to focus on with them and what I sent to them for their recommendations to test. So I will report back as to how those go.
Yes.
Okay, so as I said, this is part one of two parts. So I don't want to keep this too much longer. But if there's anything for somebody who I guess is just starting to learn about this kind of perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, I know it can be really overwhelming. So where would you recommend that what should they focus on first, just to start their education process? So then before they start adding in habits, because I know it can be super overwhelming.
Yeah. And I think uh, the piece that really stands out for me is around that awareness piece. It's like you said,
Mhm.
Laura, like this problem around just education with respect to women's health and our hormone journey starts way before this perimenopause, menopause transition. Often we short of trying to prevent pregnancies early on, like we don't get a good kind of holistic and complete education on what our hormones are, what they do, and how they impact and play a role in other systems in our body. So to me, starting with conversations and learnings around understanding the body gives you a really great framework to understand, okay, this is what these hormones do in my body. And then it gives you a great jumping off point for understanding, okay, now when they change, this makes a lot of sense now why these various symptoms are showing up. And that's also kind of when we were talking from a coursework perspective, the first modules are geared towards giving you that foundation. So, if you haven't had that education, which a lot of us have not, we're going to give you that core baseline that gives you a sense of like, okay, well, what is a regular cycle? What are the roles of estrogen and progesterone? Not limited to just their role in our reproductive health, but how does it affect other systems in the body? Our metabolism levels, our energy levels, our mood, our hair, skin, nails, like they are not limited. They don't just hang out in one area. They're affecting all these
Yeah.
systems. So to me, awareness is key. And there's some, great resources and whatnot from that can be a good foundation. And also was such a key part for us in creating the course, was to go back and build those foundations out.
Well, and that's the one thing in the next podcast, we're going to dive into a little bit more detailed strategies around nutrition and stress and mindset, and how can we help you guys start your own menopausal coaching journey. But I think I always say this to my students too, I think first of all is just even recognizing, hey, do I know what's going on in my body, or there is something off? That's the first step that then opens up this whole beautiful journey of really starting to learn your body. And, as Dr. Cheryl was saying, when we developed this course, the first part was the foundations, because, and when we were asking our students too, they were saying, I never even learned any of this, and I'm 50 years old. Like,
Yeah.
they never even learned what was happening in their body during when they were cycling, right? Having their menstrual cycle. We just think that we have it once a month, but once you start to understand how to also analyze it, you can see what's actually happening and understand your body and lead your own health journey. And this is something at Fit Chicks Academy I have been such an advocate of from day one. It's not about finding always the person or the coach or the solution. It's about really starting to be involved and say, hey, I feel empowered I know somewhat what's going on. I know I'm going to try this direction. I know I should talk to a practitioner, whatever it may be, but you feeling that you have some control over it, as opposed to waiting for somebody else to tell you, or for something to show up that's going to force you to do that. So I'm really excited for part 2 of this discussion. So hopefully this was a little intro into perimenopause and menopause, a little hormones 101. And of course, as we were talking about, we have our second round of the holistic perimenopause and menopause coach certification program starting on January the 19th. So I'm actually going to be hosting a live info session on Thursday, January 11th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can go to fitchicksacademy.com/menoinfo, MENOIFO, and you can go and save your seat there. We'll be dropping the links in the show notes for this as well. So that will be on January 11th at 1 p.m. I'm going to be going through all of what the certification includes. And if you're ready to sign up, you also can go to fitchicksacademy.com/menopause, and you'll get all the information on the program as well. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Cheryl, and I will see you next week for part 2. Bye.